Valentine's Day wasn't exactly my thing. My girlfriend Elena knew this, but she loved it, so I always made the effort. Fancy dinner, candles, the whole thing. This year we picked a waterfront restaurant in Miami, a place known for its seafood and live jazz. It was packed. Couples toasting champagne, waiters rushing between tables, the smell of garlic butter and grilled fish filling the air. It should have been a perfect night, but from the moment we sat down, I had this gnawing feeling in my gut, like something wasn't right at first. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the vague tension. I felt like something unseen was pressing in. But then I saw a man sitting alone at a table near the back, mid-50s, balding. He wore a crisp black suit that didn't quite fit him, right too tight at the shoulders, like it had been borrowed. He had no food in front of him, just a nearly full glass of red wine. But what unsettled me the most was his expression. He was watching us, not casually, not in passing, unblinking, focused. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was just lonely, spending Valentine's Day on his own. Maybe he was waiting for someone, but every time I looked up, his eyes were still locked on us, on Eleanor. She didn't notice. At first, she was scrolling through the menu, debating between the filet and the lobster risotto, but I was barely paying attention to her. I was too busy watching him. He never checked his phone, never looked away, just sat there watching a waiter passed by, and I caught his attention. "Hey," I said, keeping it low, "the guy in the black suit over there, do you know if he's waiting for someone?" The waiter gave a quick look over his shoulder. "That guy, he's been here for hours, ordered one glass of wine, hasn't touched it." I felt a chill creep up my spine. For hours, since before my shift started. "Is he bothering you?" I hesitated, looking at Eleanor, who was still oblivious to the situation. "No," I said, "just weird." The waiter nodded and moved on. I turned my attention back to the man, but he was gone. The chair was empty, the wine glass untouched, still sat on the table. I blew out a breath, rolling my shoulders, as if I could shrug off the discomfort. Maybe I'd been overthinking it. Maybe he just left. Elena finally noticed my distraction. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just thought I saw someone I knew. I lied. What are you getting?" She smiled. "Lobster risotto." Obviously, I tried to focus on the meal, on Elena's laugh, on the warmth of the restaurant. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but the feeling that something was wrong was only getting stronger. Then the waiter came back. He slid something onto the table right next to my plate. A small folded napkin. I frowned. "What's this?" "It's from that man. He asked me to give it to you." I unfolded the napkin, my pulse picking up as I read the message. "How much? Name your price." For a second, I didn't understand. Then my stomach twisted. I looked up, scanning the restaurant. The man wasn't at his table anymore, but I spotted him standing near the exit, waiting. "Eleanor," I said quietly, "we need to leave." "What, why?" I shoved the napkin into my pocket. "I don't like this place. Let's go." She frowned, clearly confused, but she didn't argue. I threw a couple of bills on the table, grabbed my coat, and stood up. The moment we moved, the man stepped forward, cutting us off. Leaving already, his voice was smooth, almost most friendly. I positioned myself slightly in front of Elena. "Yeah, we are." He smiled. A shame. I was hoping to make a business proposal. I clenched my fists, not interested. He watched me closely, then his attention shifted to Eleanor, and that disturbing smirk spread across his face. "Are you sure?" I grabbed Elena's hand and pushed past him. To my relief, he didn't follow, but as we stepped out onto the street, I could still feel his eyes on us. We walked fast, weaving through the crowd of tourists and Valentine's Day couples. I didn't stop until we reached the parking lot, my chest tight with adrenaline. "Elena, get in the car." "What the hell is going on?" she demanded. "Who was that guy?" I pulled out the napkin and handed it to her. She read it, her face drained of color. "What does this mean?" I shook my head. "I don't know, and I don't want to find out." I started the car, checking the rearview mirror. No sign of him. Still, I drove in the opposite direction of my apartment, weaving through different streets, making sure we weren't being followed. Only when we were miles away did I let out a breath. We never saw him again, but that note still haunts me. Not because of what it said, but because I'll never know what he was actually offering and what would have happened if I'd given him an answer. I should have said no when my co-worker Danny first suggested setting me up with her amazing friend. I laughed it off. Blind dates weren't my thing, and Valentine's Day was the last day I wanted to spend awkwardly getting to know a stranger, but Danny was relentless. She's funny, she's smart, and she's gorgeous. She insisted, nudging my arm. Come on, man, one dinner, worst case. You get an awkward story. She had a point. And after a long shift where I spent most of the night watching couples clink glasses over overpriced steaks, I figured why not? Maybe I'd surprise myself. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was not asking for more details. The restaurant was a small Italian place in River North, dimly lit with the scent of garlic and fresh bread hanging in the air. It was nice enough to set the mood, but not overly fancy. I got there a little early, texting Danny to let her know I was on board with this ridiculous setup. Then she walked in. Maya. She was pretty in a clean-cut way, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, red lipstick that matched her dress. She smiled, and for a moment I felt like maybe this wouldn't be so bad. We ordered drinks and conversations started flowing. She was easy to talk to, laughed at my jokes, asked about my job. I told her about working as a server. My weirdest customer interactions, the kind of small talk you expect on a first date, and then things got weird. You must be exhausted, she said, stirring her drink absent-mindedly after last night closing that late. I blinked. How you know I closed? She giggled. Danny mentioned it. That made sense, but something about the way she said it, casual, like she wasn't thinking about it, rubbed me the wrong way. I shrugged it off and asked her about her job. She worked in marketing, or at least that's what she claimed, but her answers were vague. The conversation turned to family, and I told her about my younger brother, how he just started college. Oh, at Loyola, right? My stomach tightened. I hadn't mentioned the school. Yeah, I said slowly. How'd you know that? She tilted her head, smiling like it was a joke you posted about it. The picture at his dorm move-in's so cute. I stared at her. That picture had been posted months ago, buried in my feed. Something was off. I looked at my phone, trying to think of an excuse to leave. Then she mentioned a local coffee shop I frequented, describing my usual order with eerie precision. I laughed, assuming she had guessed. I've seen you there. She said a lot that was unsettling. I never noticed her before, but she described where I usually sat, how I fidgeted with my phone when waiting for my order. Then she mentioned my apartment building, the route I walked home after work, the laundromat I used. My stomach tightened. These weren't things Danny would have told her. This wasn't casual knowledge. I tried to change the subject, but she leaned in, resting her chin on her hand, eyes fixed on mine. You think you're hard to follow, she said, voice barely above a whisper. You're not. That was it. I needed to leave. I felt sick. The waiter came by asking if we wanted another round. I shook my head, already standing. I should get going, early shift tomorrow. Maya's face didn't change. She just sighed and leaned back in her chair. I knew you'd try to run. My stomach lurched. I stepped back, nearly knocking into the waiter, what she stood slowly smoothing her dress. You always leave places early, always take the long way home. I tried to keep my voice steady. How long have you been watching me? She stared at me like I was the crazy one. You're overthinking this. I turned and walked out the door into the street. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone, texting Danny. Who the hell is Maya? What do you mean? She said you guys were hitting it off. No, she knows things about me, personal things, what she knew about my coffee spot, my brother's college. That's weird, but maybe she just saw stuff online. I wanted to believe that I really did, but deep down I knew better. A notification popped up, a text, unknown number running, doesn't help. You know, my mouth went dry. I turned, scanning the sidewalk. People walked past, lost in their own worlds. No sign of her, no sign of anyone watching. I bolted home, locking my door the second I got inside. For the next few days I barely slept until the messages started. At first they were harmless. You left so fast I wasn't done talking. Then you always take 8th Street home, but not tonight, smart, and then I'll see you soon. I blocked the number, switched up my routine, taking different routes home, going to a different coffee shop. I thought that was enough until Danny pulled me aside at work. A week later, she came in again. Danny said, voice low, asked where you were. I told her you had the night off, and she just smiled like she already knew that night. Nothing happened. No more texts. No sign of her. A few days passed, then a week, then 2. I started to believe she had finally given up. Maybe she got bored. Maybe she moved on. I let my guard down. Then one night I saw her again, I had just finished a late shift and was walking home, the cold biting through my jacket, and I was almost at my building when I spotted a figure standing near the entrance. At first I thought it was a neighbor, but as I got closer I saw the red dress. She wasn't facing me. She was standing still, staring up at my apartment window. My stomach twisted into knots. My first instinct was to turn back, but I was too close. She had to have seen me. I gritted my teeth and walked past, refusing to look directly at her, acting as if I didn't recognize her. She didn't move, not even when I unlocked the door, not even when I slipped inside and bolted up the stairs 2 at a time. Once I reached my apartment, I pressed myself against the door, waiting, listening. Nothing. The next morning, she was gone. But 2 nights later, something else happened. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. A notification, groggy. I grabbed it and squinted at the screen. Airdrop request. One photo my breath caught. I didn't recognize the name attached to the request, but when I swiped it away, another popped up. One photo, then another, and another. I turned off my phone and lay there in the dark, barely breathing, ears straining for any noise out inside my window. But the street was silent. A week later, Danny called me. You're not going to believe this. Maya wasn't her friend. She had been a regular at the restaurant, one of those customers you barely notice, the kind that blend into the background. She had asked Danny to set us up after weeks of eating there alone. Danny, thinking she was harmless, agreed. Then Danny did some digging. Maya had done this before. She had followed another guy, inserted herself into his life when he rejected her. She vandalized his car, left notes on his doorstep. It got bad enough that he moved across the country. I reported her to the police. They took my statement, but there wasn't much they could do. No crime had technically been committed. A restraining order wouldn't stop someone like her, so I did the only thing I could. I changed everything, deleted my old social media and took different routes home every night. And I never agreed to a blind date again. I never heard from her again, but sometimes when I pass a storefront window or glance at a reflection in a train door, I swear I see her just for a second. I'll never forget that day. It was February 14th, 1996, and my first grade teacher, Ms. Buford, was pleased as punch with the activity she'd created. She'd asked our class to use construction paper, ribbons, and other materials to make a Valentine's Day card, then give it to someone else. The more kids who accepted your Valentine, the more points you got, and the kid who had the most points at the end of class would win a bag of candy. I didn't care about candy. I didn't care about winning. I just needed someone to take my stupid, ugly Valentine so that I wouldn't be the only kid left still holding their own card. But no one would. I stood near the rear of the classroom with my hands clenched into fists, fighting back tears. There was Ms. Buford, standing in front of the chalkboard with a smug smile on her face. There was Kyle, the most popular boy in class, giving chocolates to anyone who took a Valentine from him. There was the rest of my class, laughing, smiling, having a good time. It was like they were a totally different species from me, and more than anything else, I wanted to be like them. I shut my eyes tight and wished harder than I'd wished for anything that anyone would take the card from my hand. Or, don't you have a Valentine? It didn't sound like an answer to my prayers. It sounded like someone was teasing me. Stranger still, the voice was coming from the closet where we hung our coats. As I turned around to look at it, I remembered how dark and musty it always seemed, how I always had an irrational fear that a hand might reach out from that wall of children's clothing and pull me through to some other place. Now, however, there was another child standing in the shadows. I'll be your Valentine if you'll be mine. I gulped, my throat dry. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? The girl stepped out of the closet and approached with strange, jerky steps. I didn't recognize her, but that didn't surprise me. I barely knew anyone at Briarwood Elementary School. The girl wore mismatched clothes, oversized rubber boots, pajama pants, a lumpy wool sweater stained with mud. They looked like clothes you'd find in the trash along a riverbank after a flood, I thought, and a shiver ran up my spine. Her hair was long and bedraggled and seemed wet somehow, as though she'd just been swimming. She walked up beside me and grabbed my wrist with a tiny, cold hand. The shock of it made me release my grip on the clumsily made card I was holding, and before I knew it, she'd taken it and replaced it with another. For a long moment, it was like we were the only two people in the world. The noise of my first grade class faded into the background, replaced by the steady dripping of water from her hair. Her thin, wide mouth was smiling at me, but her eyes weren't. They were hollow. I gasped, and she was gone, leaving only the black construction paper heart that she had pressed into my hand. The chaos of the classroom returned to its full volume, and I thought it was over. The card in my hand had an irony chemical smell like metal and motor oil, and before I knew it, it had begun to smoke. It burst into flames before my eyes. No one could figure out exactly how the fire had been started, but I was blamed for it anyway. I was suspended from school for 2 days. Although my parents were furious, what hurt the most was that no one believed me. There was no girl matching the description I gave in my class, or even in the school. But for me, laying awake at night, my eyes fixed on the closet, that knowledge was far from comforting. I was terrified that at any minute the door might creak open and she would be there again, with her child-sized shadow and those awful empty eyes staring out of the dark. Yet when I returned to school and she still hadn't reappeared after a week, my fear and the memories of what had happened that day began to fade. Maybe my parents and the school counselor were right. Maybe I had made it all up for attention. It was easier somehow to believe that, until it happened again. I don't remember much of Valentine's Day 1999, only that it rained, I caught a cold, my mother made me eat chicken noodle soup, and that I spent the evening reading in bed. By then I had realized that I preferred the vivid, fantastical world of fiction over the dull, petty one that was so important to my classmates. I could spend hours with my nose in a book, barely noticing the passage of time. It was around 10 p.m. when I heard tapping against my bedroom window. At first I thought it was just the rain, but the sound was too loud and repetitive for that. A tree branch then, I thought, or maybe some weird night bird pecking on the glass. The overcast sky outside was so dark that the window seemed to have been painted black. If I wanted to find the source of that irritating noise, I'd have to open it first. Damp, chilly night air blew into my bedroom as I leaned out into the night. No bird took flight, no tree branch scraped against my face. Rain fell silently on my still, dark backyard. I was about to pull my head back indoors when 2 pale hands reached down from above, locking my head in place with a vice-like grip. I shut my eyes tight and felt cold lips press against my own. Happy Valentine's Day, I screamed. My eyes snapped open, but she was already gone, swallowed by the night. My parents came running, but when they burst through the door, I didn't know what to say. I was afraid that if I told the truth, they would think I was crazy, and I knew what happened to crazy people. I'd seen black and white photos of old asylums in library books, pictures of bare padded walls and skeletally thin figures in straitjackets, grinning madly from the shadows. I would rather die than wind up in a place like that, I thought. I kept my mouth shut. By morning, my cold had mutated into a full-blown fever. I was delirious, raving about pale hands and girls in closets while I writhed in my sweat-soaked sheets. In my dreams, I was drowning, sinking slowly into muddy water so deep that I couldn't see the bottom, the murky daylight getting further and further away with each passing second. I slept for nearly 3 full days, and even after I woke, it was weeks before I got my energy back. My parents blamed the open window and the wet winter air, but I had a different theory, one born of the scary story collections that I loved so much back then. The girl had drained me somehow. She had drunk my energy so that she could continue to exist. For a few years after that, I ditched school on February 14th, locking myself in my room with the lights on until the fateful day had passed, but I couldn't get away with that forever. Eventually, I was forced to go out into the world, where she could get to me. The year I was 13, it happened during my walk back home from the bus stop. It was a gloomy day, warm but overcast, and I still remember the sinking feeling I got in the pit of my stomach when the bright yellow bus disappeared around the corner. My house, which was barely 2 blocks distant, suddenly felt very, very far away. I was walking past the drainage sewer when her cold fingers gripped my hand and spun me around. For the first time in years, I found myself face to face with her. She had grown along with me. Her clothes were different, but they still had that cast-off, waterlogged look, and her bedraggled hair now hung down nearly to her waist. But those black empty eye sockets, those hadn't changed. "I hope you're ready for our date." With incredible strength, she dragged me off the sidewalk toward the sewer canal. She was a head shorter than I was, and probably less than half my weight, but she pulled me along as if I weighed nothing at all. Soon we were inside the small clump of waterlogged pine trees that loomed over the concrete ditch. My feet slipped in the mud, but she kept pulling, dragging me up to the point where the soggy ground sank into a deep pond. She wasn't going to stop, I realized with horror. She was going to take me into the water with her. My fever dream came back to me with horrible clarity. The murky water filling my lungs, slowly sinking as a dead weight pulled me down. I thought that I had been screaming for help before, but that was nothing compared to the shrieks that came out of my mouth then. I threw myself onto the muddy shore, twisting and squirming, but nothing could break her grip. I took one last deep breath before the frigid water closed over my head. We must have been about 15 feet down when she stopped and pointed to something in the muck. I couldn't make out any details in the wall of mud. The greenish light was too dim, and besides, my lungs were ready to explode. Her tugging on my wrist grew more insistent until she finally did the last thing I would have expected. She let me go. Black spots flashed in front of my eyes. I wasn't much of a swimmer, and my arms felt heavy, weakened by a lack of oxygen. With the surface just a few tantalizing feet away, I realized that I wasn't going to make it. I had expected the feeling to be terrifying, but it wasn't. It was more like acceptance. I didn't have to fight anymore. I could just let myself sink. Water rushed up beneath me, and the pond vomited me out onto the muddy shore. I lay there shivering, bent double, hacking up foul water, and wondering why I had been given me another chance. Was this a curse? Some kind of sick game? I didn't even know who she was, but back at home after the longest shower of my life, I became determined to find out. There wasn't much to go on. After my near miss with the elementary school counselor, I didn't dare to risk telling anyone about my experience, and the library and internet weren't much help either. I stumbled upon a few stories of local ghosts and urban legends, but none fit the description of the girl who appeared to me every Valentine's Day. I knew that I should go back to the pond, but I couldn't bring myself to dive back into that foul-smelling greenish water in search of whatever the girl had wanted me to see. The older I got, the harder it became to keep my secret. It wasn't long before I ran out of explanations for the friends and family who demanded to know why I behaved so strangely every February 14th. During the winter of 2002, my parents had finally had enough. They insisted that I attend my high school's annual Valentine's Day dance. They refused to hear my excuses about not having a date or suffering from social anxiety. I was going, and that was that. For a time, I hoped that an oncoming snowstorm would cause the dance to be cancelled, but the big blizzard that everyone was so afraid of turned out to be a light dusting of powder. With my too big borrowed suit and small circle of equally single friends, I figured I'd just have to make the best of it, and hope that she didn't show up. By the end of the night, I was actually having a pretty good time. The whole thing was sort of fun once I stopped taking it so seriously, and I felt confident that she wouldn't appear in front of such a big crowd. By 10:30 p.m., smooth, slow songs were playing and couples were rocking their way awkwardly across the squeaky gym floor. My friends, along with about half of the attendees, had already shuffled outside to be picked up by their guardians, but my own parents demanded that I stay until after the last dance. I figured I'd kill some time by walking around the plastic bleachers at the edge of the dance floor. And that was where I saw her. She was sitting in the topmost row, well beyond the slow-moving, colorful lights. If it hadn't been for the glitter of her damp hair in the darkness and that creeping feeling on the back of my neck, I never would have known she was there at all. She was wearing stained and half-torn wedding gown that, under the circumstances, looked like a nightmarish version of a prom dress. When my eyes met the hollows where hers had been, she ran a long, pale tongue across her lips. I looked away immediately, telling myself childishly that if I ignored her, maybe she would go away. But when I gave in, looked again, she had gotten even closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned on her, demanding to know who she was and what she wanted from me. "Look beneath," she rasped, then stepped backwards into the darkness. I felt the heavy hand of the football coach on my shoulder. He wanted to know who I had been yelling at. I shook him off and scrambled up the bleachers. Beneath the bench where she had been sitting was a bouquet of dead roses tied with a half-decayed ribbon. The flowers were choked with muck and trash, but under them I spotted something, a golden heart-shaped locket. I didn't know much about jewelry, but it looked expensive. Jogging out of the gym and into the lobby, I inspected it more closely. There was an engraving on the back, RKL plus EM, February 14th, 1992. My heart skipped a beat. My father's full name was Raymond Keith Lancaster, and RKL could just as easily have been his initials. But who was EM? Why was that date important? And why the flowers? When my father picked me up 20 minutes later, I was tempted to ask him about it, but some instinct made me hesitate. "Look beneath," the girl had said. What if she was talking about more than just the flowers? Until I knew more, I decided to keep my discovery to myself. RKL, EM, look beneath. It occurred to me that she might have been talking about my house. My father had an office in the basement, although it wasn't much of a study, just a big desk for the models he painted, some filing cabinets and bookshelves, and a safe. I had never wondered what might be in there before. Business documents, my father had said, and I'd taken him at his word. But now... On most days I got home from school before my parents left work, giving me about a 2-hour window to look beneath. There was something unsettling about the bare white walls and cool stillness of the basement. Something that made me sure I would look up from my investigation to find her, or worse, my angry father hovering over me, demanding to know what I was doing, demanding to know what I had found out. In the top drawer of my father's desk, I discovered a yellowed instruction manual for the safe. It took a combination of 10 letters or numbers to open it, and 5 wrong attempts would seal it completely. I opened it on the 3rd try with EM2141992. Just as my father had insisted, there was nothing but old paperwork inside, at first glance. Underneath it, however, was something else. An envelope full of letters that had been sent between my father and someone named Elizabeth Murphy. I realized with disgust that my father had been having an affair, but from there, the notes took an even darker turn. Something terrible had happened on the night of Valentine's Day, 1992. "I know how bad you feel," Eliza had written, "but you did what was best for everyone. There's no point in destroying all our lives over one little accident." One little accident. The internet was a different beast now than it had been when I had first searched for ghosts and local legends. Less than a minute after I powered up the PC on my father's desk, I was looking at a news article about a girl who'd gone missing in my neighborhood. On February 14th, 1992, I recognized the gap-toothed, brown-haired girl in the photo, although the version of her that I knew was older, paler, and missing her eyes. Laura Broadwell's mother, Amanda, wasn't sure exactly what had gone wrong that night. She had been drinking pretty heavily since the divorce, and that last thing she remembered was coming in with the groceries, putting on some cartoons for her daughter, and opening a few bottles of cheap champagne. It was possible, she admitted, that she hadn't completely closed the front door. Possible, too, that 4-year-old Laura had seen the half-open door and wandered outside to see what the world looked like after dark. Unfortunately for the police, the rainstorm that swept through that night washed away any evidence of where Laura might have gone. Regular updates on the case continued for a few months afterwards, but with no leads and Laura's mother already behind bars for negligence, there was little to report. By the time Laura Broadwell appeared in the closet of my first-grade classroom, she had been forgotten by almost everyone for years. Most people in the comment sections blamed Amanda for what had happened, but no one could offer a clear explanation for what had occurred that night. Armed with my father's letters to Eliza and the knowledge that she had lived right across the street from the drainage ditch, however, I didn't think I needed one. It was easy to imagine how it might have gone. Raymond Keith Lancaster, speeding out of the neighborhood to meet his lover, a bouquet and a locket beside him in the passenger seat. 4-year-old Laura Broadwell walking across the yard while her mother snores drunkenly on the couch in the blue glow of her cartoons. Laura doesn't look up before crossing the road. My father, with only one thing on his mind, doesn't brake in time. Slick roads, screeching tires, and a sudden horrible snapping sound. My panicking father checks for witnesses, but no one is looking out their windows on a rainy Valentine's Day night. He sees the drainage ditch and the pond beyond it. He wraps the body in a tarp from the trunk, weighs it down, and hurls it into the water, unaware that the bouquet and locket have fallen out onto the road in the confusion. Rain washes them down the concrete ditch and into the pond, where they sink down into the mud along with whatever was left of Laura Broadwell. He takes his car into an under-the-table shop, blaming wet roads and a fallen tree for the damages. As the days drag on, Eliza and my father realize that they're in the clear. The secret of their affair is safe, as is the secret of the death they caused one rainy February night. Was it the link between my father's crime and the holiday that drew Laura to me all those years ago? I wasn't sure, but I knew what I had to do. This year, on Valentine's Day, I went back to the pond beyond the drainage ditch by choice this time. On a burner phone, I called in a tip about where the missing body of Laura Broadwell might be found. After hanging up, I sat and spoke to the shadows on the surface of the dark winter water. I said that I would leave the locket on my father's desk that night, so that he would know that everyone he cared about would soon find out the truth. I also said that I'd leave the front door of my house open just a crack, just as it had been left open for Laura all those years ago. It's just a few minutes after midnight, and I can already hear the creak of footsteps in the hallway downstairs. I wonder what she's bringing my father for Valentine's Day. I've been single my entire life. I really don't mind it. It's just how I've always been. And yet, I still buy Valentine's candy and a card every year. That simple thing saves my life. I moved to a small town right before starting high school. It was difficult trying to make new friends and adjusting to an entirely new place at the same time. By the time February rolled around, I was finally feeling as if I'd gotten into the groove of things. I had only made a handful of friends, and to my shock, the first time I was ever asked out on a date was a week before Valentine's Day. I felt awkward going out with a girl who I'd never spoken with before, so I turned her down. She got angry, claiming she had other options and was just being nice. That might be the case, but her extreme reaction confused me. When I was able to, I asked my friend Travis about it. "Oh yeah, you die if you're single on Valentine's Day. Get your heart ripped out and everything. So, find a girlfriend for the day," he explained, and I scoffed at the idea. "Come on, you don't expect me to believe that, do you?" I asked, thinking he was just pulling a joke on the new kid. He acted as if he was just giving me some facts. He was looking at me as if I was crazy for not knowing about getting a date or dying. I told him he was crazy, but he just shook his head. "It happens every year. Someone gets their heart ripped out. It might not be in this town, but like it's nearby. And it's always someone single. I guess you can risk it by why. It's just one day," he said, trying to defend his point. This was before everyone had a cell phone in their pocket, so I couldn't look up deaths of people missing their hearts right then. I made a note to research it later so I could call him out on his urban legend. I crossed my arms, still not buying what he was saying. "That's stupid. Are you saying what? Someone knows you're single and kills you?" I pressed. "A person doesn't do it. Some sort of monster does. No one has lived after seeing it, but people said they heard drums and then found someone without their heart." Travis was again looking at me as if I should know all this. "A Valentine's Day monster? Really?" Well, Christmas has Santa and there is an Easter bunny, so why can't Valentine's Day have something? For the next 10 minutes, I roasted his idea and belief in the Valentine's Day monster. At least he could take it all as a joke, even if he did believe the murders were real. He wasn't positive a monster was doing it, but couldn't offer up any other reason behind the deaths. And he wasn't risking it. He already had a date lined up with a girl he didn't even like. I still thought the entire idea was dumb. The rest of the school didn't share my outlook. As the days slowly got closer and closer to the fated day, the students got paired up with each other. Some done out of safety, others using the monster as an excuse to finally ask out their crush. I received a few pity offers, but I refused all of them as an act of rebellion against this stupid small town's tradition. I just watched as everyone started dating in fear of death. The stores sold out of candy and cards pretty quick. Normally everywhere would be flooded with red and pink products. The shelves were barren a few days before the 14th. Now, I refused to accept any offers, and I didn't plan on asking someone out either. The school offered a program where you could buy sweetheart candies to be delivered to class for a small fee. I didn't mind getting my new friends one each, all while making up silly names to put on the card of who they would receive it from. It was the only thing related to the whole day I gave into. Aside from buying a box of chocolates for myself, the chocolates were just a normal box of assorted types from the grocery store I'd gotten with some money made from doing chores. When I bought them, the cashier slapped a heart-shaped sticker on the box without my permission. A small one for someone to write who the box was meant for. With how crazy this town was over the holiday, I didn't blame her. By that time, I'd been so overexposed to anything Valentine related, just seeing the sticker put me off eating the chocolates. I shoved them in my backpack to forget about them until after the 14th was over. I really wish I had taken the entire thing a bit more seriously. It wasn't until the night before Valentine's Day that I finally looked up the murders, finding them to be true. Dread started to form in my stomach as I scrolled through the library computer after school while waiting for my father to pick me up. I didn't find all the mysterious deaths, but enough to make me worried. 3 people were found with their hearts missing. The police said that from the state of their bodies, they were killed on Valentine's Day, even though their bodies weren't found right away. An entire town was warning me about this, and yet I still sat in shock after finding out it was true. My father finally got me from school, but told me I needed to walk home the next day. I sat in the car, silently debating on what to do. He just chalked up my distressed state as normal teenage behavior. I didn't sleep that night. I tried thinking of names of students that might not have a date, all while knowing it was useless. When the clock turned midnight and it was official the 14th, I nearly had a panic attack, convinced the monster would swoop in to take my heart. The only way I got through that night without a mental breakdown was to shift my train of thought back to what it was before looking up the murders. A Valentine's Day monster was stupid. It wasn't real. Some heartless store manager saw the murders and made up the story to sell more products through fear. That was it. It had to be it. I remained awake all night. In the morning, my mother noticed how I looked and offered to let me stay home. I refused, secretly hoping I could find a date if I went to school. The place was abuzz with new couples and gift exchanges. As I walked down the hallway, a few students looked at me with pity in their eyes. Most knew my single stance and how I would be the monster's top choice if it was real. No one went near me that day if they could help it. My few new friends awkwardly tried to find reasons to rush off if I tried talking to them. All of them, having temporary new girlfriends, gave them a good enough reason to be left out. My candy heart prank wasn't funny. Some thought it was, but I couldn't find the humor in anything that day. Instead, I spent it looking over my shoulder, expecting to hear drums at any second. The final bell rang and Travis was brave enough to walk over to me for a chat. I think he thought this was going to be our last conversation. The idea got him motivated enough to walk over, but not to find the words. "Do you, want to come over? I am going out today, but maybe we can hang out beforehand. There is a really good show and..." He trailed off, feeling awkward. "It's fine. I'll just chill at home. My parents are going out and won't be home until after dinner, so I have the entire place to myself. That never happens. They finally think I'm old enough to be trusted to be left alone," I explained, determined to still not believe in this nonsense even though I was terrified. Travis nodded, looking pale. He wasn't brave enough to press me on hanging out. After all, he was certain I was going to die that night. He didn't want to be around to see it. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," I said, and gave him a shaky wave. He gave one back and started to hurry over to his new girlfriend. When you're a teenager, everything is a big deal. As I walked away from school towards home, I felt like I was walking towards my own death. The sky was overcast. It made me feel even more gloomy. I kept mocking myself for my mood as I walked along the neighborhoods that had become familiar to me over the past few months. Finding a small rock, I started to kick it as I walked, trying to take my mind off the fear in my chest. A car started to drive along behind me with such loud music I could hear it thumping through the air. I watched it cruise by, a bit annoyed over the sound. If you're going to blast music, at least play something good and not something that just thudded. As the car kept going down the street, the music went with it, but a hint of the thudding remained. I stopped, confused on why I could still hear the sound if the car was so far. When it finally turned out of sight, I realized the car wasn't the source of all of the noise. My heart started to beat so fast and hard it matched the thudding rhythm that I could swear was getting closer and closer. I didn't look behind me or even get angry at myself for getting scared. I just ran down the street. I should have run up to one of the houses asking for help. I was so frightened nothing rational came to mind. I ran like crazy, all while that beating followed. I wished this was a prank but didn't stop running to find out. My mind was unable to work as my lungs burned from the mad dash. For a moment I thought I was losing whatever was chasing me. I stumbled, nearly falling over a crooked sidewalk square in front of my house. I couldn't tell how close the thumping sound was over my own heart. Sweat poured down my face and I felt faint. I slammed into my front door, banging on it before I remembered my parents were out. I nearly screamed in frustration. The door was locked and my keys were buried under my books inside my backpack. That thudding sound was all I heard. It was so close it rumbled in my chest. My hands shook as I fumbled to get the zipper open. I was scared to death and couldn't keep my eyes open. Squeezing them shut, I felt around in my bag for my key. My hand brushed against it when a puff of wind came across my face. I smelled something sweet, and then the wind came again. To my horror, my mind clued into the fact it wasn't the wind but something breathing on my face. It was too late. Even if I got my key, I couldn't unlock the door before whatever brought the heart-thumping sound took my heart too. I refused to open my eyes to see the monster I now knew to be real. "I love the sound of your heart. It's a shame it's alone. Let me add it to the others." The voice that spoke wasn't some prank. It was twisted and beyond anything a human could make. My mind was racing. I felt a sharp tip of a claw poke my chest, leaving a small cut through my shirt. A cruel laugh came as I whimpered in fear. With my hands still in my backpack, I felt something that was not my books or my house key. A crazy idea came to mind. It was either that or death, so I grabbed a hold of the only thing I could think of. Yanking the box of chocolates from my bag, I held it out to the monster I still refused to see. My voice strained and shaking, I asked it a question I prayed would save my life. "Will you be my Valentine this year?" My heart nearly beat out of my chest. Opening my eyes a crack, I could see the box in my hand, but not the creature that brought along countless heartbeats that mixed in with my own. I should have died. Instead of clawing out my heart, the twisted hand with razor-sharp nails reached out and took the box. I forced my eyes shut, my entire body shaking. Something brushed my face, causing me to tense up so much it hurt. That clawed finger brushed some hair from my face with another cruel laugh. "What a cute child you are. I'll accept this gift this year, but someday I'll be back to claim your heart." I bit down on my tongue, trying not to scream at that horrible voice. With one final laugh that rattled my bones, the thudding stopped. It took me forever before I gathered up the courage to open my eyes. Nothing was on the front step. I was alone. If it wasn't for the rip in my shirt, I would have thought the whole thing came about due to stress and lack of sleep. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I mean, who would believe me? I went to school for the first half of the day on the 15th. I had barely slept for 2 days and needed to take the rest of the day off. But I didn't want my friends to think I died. All of them looked shocked I'd lived. I just said I got lucky. The school moved on. The short-lived relationships caused by that day fizzed out. As time crept along, I started to dread knowing Valentine's Day was coming yet again. I bought more candy, roses and a card, expecting a visit from a monster. I should have just gone along and dated someone, but somehow the idea of it was more stressful than dealing with a monster. I anticipated and feared Valentine's Day, only to have nothing happen. Nothing happens besides the fact that the gifts I addressed to the creature go missing overnight. As the years carried on, I kept buying different gifts with the same result. As I've gotten older, I've heard those terrible heartbeats faintly on Valentine's Day. Each year the sound gets louder. I think this year is finally going to be when that monster shows itself. Again, just asking someone out may save my life. But I think if the monster does show up, I'll ask it the question yet again, but this time I will keep my eyes open.